They say the dead don't speak, but in the echoing halls of power, some secrets refuse to stay buried. This story doesn't come from a dusty archive or a forgotten file. It comes from a man who once held the highest security clearance, a man who swore an oath to protect the state, and a man who, by the end, was desperately praying for a god he no longer believed in. We're talking about the Kremlin, the historic fortress at the heart of Russian power. A place where layers of history are built upon layers of sacrifice, and perhaps something much, much darker. Our story focuses on the late 1990s, a time of fragile transition and deep uncertainty. The Soviet Union was a fresh memory, but the paranoia that fueled its existence still clung to the air like a perpetual winter fog. Colonel Arkady Volkov was a man carved from that era, stoic, ruthless, and absolutely dedicated to the security of the current administration. His job wasn't just physical security. He managed the deep security, the protocols for presidential retreat in case of a nuclear exchange, and the custody of certain artifacts the government preferred the world forget existed. It began with a minor tremor, not geological, but an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere around the Senate Palace, the primary workplace of the then president. Arkady first dismissed it as stress or perhaps the aging structure settling. But his team, the elite few tasked with round-the-clock unseen monitoring, began to report anomalies. Equipment would fail precisely at 3:17 a.m. Not a power surge, not a technical glitch, but a sudden dead silence in the high-end monitoring gear, only to resume working perfectly a minute later. At first, it was isolated. Then it became cyclical, and always at 3:17 a.m. Arkady was a man of logic, a product of a state that valued science and dismissed superstition. He started his own investigation. He reviewed every inch of the palace's blueprint, looking for forgotten utility tunnels or secret chambers. That's when he stumbled upon the sealed-off section beneath the Tsar Bell, a section that was, officially, only a rubble-filled cellar. Unofficially, his grandfather, a KGB officer in the 1930s, had once told him a drunken, cryptic story about a keeper who slept beneath the belfry, a creature that had been there before the Tsars, before Moscow itself. Using a custom-built ground-penetrating radar, a device so sensitive it could map a mouse in a concrete bunker, Arkady found something that didn't fit the map. Beneath the supposed cellar was a perfectly preserved circular chamber of immense pre-Christian stonework. It was not Russian, it was not Slavic. It was a cold, alien architecture. And right in the center, a single, polished black obelisk of unknown material. The radiation count was 0. The temperature was abnormally cold, and the air felt dead. Arkady assembled a covert team, hand-picked for their skepticism and courage. They breached the cellar on a frigid November night. The air hit them first, a sudden dizzying drop in temperature and a smell of ozone and wet earth. They descended into the circular chamber. The black obelisk wasn't merely a stone, it was a structure of perfectly smooth, light-absorbing material humming with an unheard frequency. As they moved closer, Arkady's radio crackled with a distorted, whispering sound. Not a language, but a sound like 100 voices speaking backwards through water. Then they saw the presidential security detail on the main floor above them, reacting to something. Through the crackling radio, they heard panicked shouts, "Intruder! White-domed corridor near the reception!" Arkady knew that corridor led directly to the president's private study. He ordered his men back up, leaving a single infrared camera trained on the obelisk. Upstairs, chaos reigned. A figure, described later by witnesses as a shimmering silhouette that was impossibly tall, had walked through the locked doors of the Senate Palace. It moved silently, indifferent to the armed guards who fired on it. The bullets simply vanished as they crossed the threshold of its form. This wasn't a living thing. It was a projection, a shadow given terrible, temporary substance. Arkady saw it. A tall, impossibly lean figure standing at the president's study door, its form wavering like heat rising off asphalt. Its presence alone was enough to make the air thick and suffocating. The president, a man famed for his iron nerve, was found moments later unconscious in his chair, his hands clamped over his ears, a thin trail of blood running from his nostrils. Medics later found no physical cause. They called it a massive, stress-induced trauma. But Arkady, watching the security footage, saw something else. As the shimmering figure stood at the president's study door, the black obelisk on his monitor downstairs, the one they had just uncovered, began to pulse with a faint crimson light. The shimmering figure was its keeper, a manifestation of the terrible buried power. It wasn't there to kill or steal, it was there to warn. The president, they discovered, had been on the verge of signing an executive order to demolish that section of the Kremlin to build a modern communication hub. He was going to disturb the deep slumber of the keeper. The moment the president collapsed, the shimmering figure dissolved and the red light on the obelisk faded. Arkady knew. The ancient power of the Kremlin was not a myth. It was a silent, dormant security system. Disturbance was met with a terrifying, non-physical deterrent. Arkady quickly ordered the passage to the chamber resealed, the access logged as a structural anomaly investigation, and the camera footage destroyed. The president, upon his recovery, inexplicably canceled the demolition order without explanation, never knowing the true source of his sudden, paralyzing fear. Arkady Volkov retired 2 years later, a decade before he was eligible. He now lives in a remote dacha outside the city, checking the official news reports every day, not for political intrigue, but for any mention of construction near the Senate Palace. He knows that the keeper is still there, a chilling presence beneath the heart of power, and he fears the day someone powerful enough or foolish enough wakes it completely. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a former high-ranking security officer who to this day suffers from night terrors of a shimmering, silent figure watching him sleep. Now let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a listener who found a strange, pulsing metal box diving near the wreck of a lost Soviet submarine.
The deep ocean is the final frontier, a world of crushing pressure, utter darkness, and secrets that the surface world can barely imagine. But the abyss is also a graveyard, and some of the coffins down there are made of steel and powered by nuclear reactors. This is the story of the K-129, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine that was lost in the North Pacific in 1968 and the bizarre, terrifying truth uncovered not by the CIA's infamous Project Azorian, but by an independent salvage crew 40 years later. The K-129 was found in a remote section of the ocean floor, split open by what was officially called an internal explosion. Decades later, a Russian-backed private company, officially tasked with retrieving historical artifacts, found the largest intact section of the forward hull, its access sealed by tons of sediment and the impossible pressure. Their lead salvage master, a gruff veteran named Oleg Turov, was a man of steel nerves and no superstition. He believed only in physics and payday. Oleg's team managed to weld a pressurized observation chamber to one of the torpedo tube hatches. They were prepared for the usual horrors: preserved bodies, rust, and perhaps a radiation spike. But what they were not prepared for was the silence. The cabin was perfectly preserved for one thing. All the glass, dials, and electronic screens had been neatly shattered, not imploded by pressure, but pulverized from the inside. And there was no crew. Every soul on the K-129, 57 men, was gone. Then came the sound. It was subtle at first, a faint, high-pitched harmonic that Oleg's audio technician dismissed as interference. But when they filtered out the deep-sea noise, the harmonic intensified. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was a perfect sine wave, a single, unwavering tone that vibrated through the metal hull. Oleg ordered his team to play the sound back at a lower frequency to analyze it. What they heard was a sound that shouldn't exist in a submarine's wreckage: a woman's voice. It wasn't a word or a scream. It was a song, a melody of perfect pitch and impossible sorrow. It was beautiful, haunting, and utterly alien. The men in the pressurized chamber, veterans of the ocean, began to feel a deep, crushing despair. One of the divers, a young man named Yuri, had to be pulled out quickly, weeping uncontrollably, whispering about his dead mother and a lifetime of regret. Oleg, determined to find the source, ordered a small remote-operated vehicle, ROV, through the torpedo tube and into the main command deck. The ROV's camera showed a scene of incredible devastation, not from an explosion, but from a deliberate, frantic act. Control panels were ripped out, wires were shredded, and the floor was littered with expended shells from the crew's personal sidearms. It looked like the men had turned on the submarine itself, or perhaps on each other. The ROV finally located the source of the harmonic, a small, nondescript wooden box bolted to the floor of the communications room. It was waterlogged, yet the sound emanated from it with perfect clarity. As the ROV approached, the song became louder, more distinct, and the voice seemed to be calling out a name. Not Oleg's name, but a name that kept repeating in the melody. A Russian name, a woman's name, Svetlana. A retired Soviet Navy officer whom Oleg had contacted for historical context recognized the name. Svetlana was the code name for a top-secret acoustic countermeasure device developed in the early 60s, a system designed to emit a sound so perfectly tuned it could scramble sonar and even affect the mental state of opposing captains. It was a weapon of pure psycho-acoustics. The device was rumored to have been deployed once on the K-129. The theory they developed was chilling. The device, the Svetlana, wasn't just scrambling sonar. It was a weapon that could target the human mind. The perfect, sorrowful harmonic wasn't just a tone. It was an emotionally corrosive signal. Once the submarine sank, the crushing pressure must have triggered an unexpected failure, causing the Svetlana device to activate and run continuously. The crew of the K-129 didn't die in an explosion. They succumbed to the sorrow generated by the device, driven mad by an endless, perfect song of cosmic loneliness. They turned on their instruments, their ship, and finally themselves, desperate to silence the beautiful, terrible lament. The fact that their bodies were gone only deepened the horror. Had the pressure and time simply disintegrated them, or had the Siren consumed them? Oleg Turov had the wooden box pulled up. When it breached the surface, the harmonic stopped abruptly. The wooden shell crumbled to dust, revealing nothing but a block of unremarkable, corroded metal. But the sound, the song of Svetlana, had already taken its toll. Oleg became withdrawn, refusing to speak of the salvage, and 2 of his team members were later found to have committed suicide, leaving behind only notes that spoke of an unbearable, crushing grief they couldn't name. The wreck of the K-129 remains on the ocean floor, officially a memorial, but those who know the true story believe that the waterlogged hull, 57 sets of vanished remains, and a silent, dark patch of the Pacific still hold the terrible residue of a song that should never have been sung. This story was shared with Watchman Tales by a former deep-sea salvage engineer who has since abandoned his profession and now lives in constant, paralyzing fear of hearing the deep-sea harmonics in the quiet of his own home. Now, let's move to the next story, which was sent to us by a man who inherited a strange map leading to a forgotten Siberian Gulag.
The Siberian taiga is a place of endless crushing cold, where the trees stretch so high they seem to scratch the face of God, and where secrets are frozen solid beneath a mile of permafrost. In the Soviet era, this frozen wilderness was the backdrop for the most brutal of the gulags, forced labor camps that swallowed millions. But this isn't a story of political terror. It's a story of a terror that even the most hardened NKVD officer couldn't comprehend. A terror that demanded absolute silence. Our story begins in 1953, the year of Stalin's death, at a remote camp known only as Kolyma-7. Kolyma-7 was a high-security, ultra-secret geological research facility disguised as a maximum security prison. Its inmates were not dissidents or thieves, but scientists, engineers, and geologists deemed enemies of the state, but whose knowledge was too valuable to waste.
They were tasked with drilling deep into the permafrost, a location that appeared to be the impact crater of a massive prehistoric meteor. The camp commandant was Major Vsevolod Grushin, a man whose soul had been withered by years of cold and cruelty. Grushin didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in orders, and his orders were simple: drill. The scientists, working in shifts under constant guard, began to report bizarre, non-geological anomalies. Their deep penetration sonar wasn't hitting solid rock. It was reporting a massive hollow cavity far below the crater. And the deeper they went, the clearer a sound became. The sound was a low-frequency, powerful thrumming that vibrated the ground and the very air. The scientists tried to measure it, but their instruments went haywire. Grushin, fearing a seismic event or a catastrophic gas pocket, sent a message to Moscow. The reply was swift and terrifying. Continue the drill. Ignore the sound. The mission is paramount. As the drill broke through the final layer, the thrumming stopped. It was replaced by an absolute, profound silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just lack noise, but actively consumes it. The guards stationed at the drill site reported that they couldn't hear their own breathing, or even the crunch of their boots on the snow. It was a sensory deprivation so total, it induced instant, crushing panic. One of the lead geologists, a man named Pavel Zaitsev, was lowered into the borehole on a shielded cable. He carried a powerful lamp and a dedicated audio recorder. He was down for less than 5 minutes. When the guards pulled him up, his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed on a point far above his head. He was completely catatonic. The lamp was shattered. The audio recorder, however, survived. Major Grushin, a man who had watched countless prisoners die, now faced something that defied his reality. He played the recording. The initial track was filled with the sound of the whirring cable and Zaitsev's labored breathing. Then came the silence. For nearly 3 full minutes, the tape registered nothing. No static, no white noise, not even the faint hiss of the tape itself. It was the purest absence of sound imaginable. But in the last 2 seconds, as the doctor was being pulled up, a sound did register. It was a single, piercing, high-frequency scream, a sound that could only be made by a human being in the throes of ultimate, soul-shattering terror. But the scream was immediately cut off, as if edited out of existence by a cosmic editor. Then only silence. Grushin's orders shifted. The scientists were told to halt all drilling and to begin constructing a sealed bunker around the borehole. The new inmates brought in were not political prisoners, but the last remaining scientists and engineers of the Kolyma project. Their task was to build a dome over the site and flood the entire area with tons of concrete and steel, sealing the silence forever. But the silence had already begun to affect the camp. Guards began to refuse their shifts near the borehole. They complained of an inability to concentrate, a feeling of being unheard and fundamentally alone. Small acts of violence broke out, not born of rage, but of a desperate need to hear a sound, any sound, even a cry of pain. Major Grushin himself was not immune. The day before the final concrete pour, he went to the borehole alone. He returned an hour later, looking older, smaller, and defeated.
he issued his final chilling command. Every single person involved with Kolyma-7, from the guards to the scientists, was to be quietly purged. Not as punishment, but as a quarantine. He believed the silence was a contagious, non-physical disease that would drive the entire world mad if it was allowed to spread. The camp was eventually discommissioned, its existence wiped from all but the most secret archives. Grushin, having ensured the purge and the sealing of the pit, calmly walked out into the taiga in a blizzard. His body never recovered. To this day, the area around the crater is a Soviet-era exclusion zone, officially labeled as a dangerously unstable magnetic anomaly. But the truth is far more terrifying. Something in that Siberian pit, a relic of a primordial impact, or perhaps an anti-sound weapon of an unknown civilization, had created a field of absolute silence. And as every soldier and scientist at Kolyma-7 learned, the absence of sound doesn't bring peace. It brings a profound, sanity-shattering nothingness that is impossible for the human mind to bear. They sealed the silence, but those who were exposed to it were forever changed, their screams and perhaps their souls cut off by the void. This unsolved mystery was submitted to Watchman Tales by the grandson of a former NKVD officer who kept a heavily redacted report detailing the Kolyma-7 incident hidden in his walls for decades. Which of these stories gave you chills tonight? Let us know in the comments. And remember, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Watchman Tales, or something may be watching you right now. Sleep well, if you can.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness has only